Hi everyone, welcome back to Rabbi's Reflection. I'm glad that you're joining with me today. We'll be continuing in our study of Kitchen Table Wisdom by Dr. Naomi Remen, and today reading the story Getting It Right. Stay with us as we read through the story and then offer some reflections. I had first met George when he was a fourth-year student at Berkeley, the year his father had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Now, in his final year of graduate school, he had come back because of problems that he did not feel he could discuss elsewhere. When his dad had been ill, his housemate Michael had been his great support. Now Michael was in trouble, traveling in a hard-partying crowd that used cocaine socially. George felt that Michael was becoming addicted. All his tactful efforts to discuss this possibility went unheard. Michael's brilliance more than compensated for his habit, and he continued to do so well at school that no one but George suspected his problem. George was a serious practitioner of Buddhism. As he understood it, the core of this spiritual teaching is a position of non-judgment and non-interference. This did not come easily to George. His family routinely criticized each other and told each other how to live. Holding what he took to be a Buddhist position toward Michael got even harder for him as Michael became more and more erratic in his personal behavior. George was uncertain what to do, and so he had come to sort things out. Their relationship reached a crisis point one evening when George brought home a young woman whose opinion mattered a great deal to him. Opening the front door, he was stunned to find Michael shirtless and dazed, sprawled on the living room floor. He had vomited on himself. I looked at the expression on Liz's face, and I just lost it, George told me ruefully. I picked Michael up, pushed him into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and shoved him into it. I remember standing there with the cold water pouring down on both of us, slamming him against the wall and shouting the most terrible things. I called him names. I told him all the things I had struggled for months not to think and feel. And then I gave him an ultimatum: clean up or get out. It was just too hard to watch him throw himself away, and I was not going to do it. When he seemed awake, I changed my wet clothes and went home with Liz. In the morning, George was contrite and disheartened. 10 years of Buddhist practice, and he had reacted exactly as his own father would have reacted. He had failed to meet his own standards of compassion. He had judged Michael harshly, and he was bitterly disappointed in himself. He dreaded going back to the apartment. Maybe Michael would not be there. But Michael was there. Pale and obviously unwell, but straight. Michael was sitting on the couch waiting. They talked. George heard about the things he had not known. How Michael, the only child of a socially prominent and wealthy family, had been raised by paid strangers and sent away to boarding school at 7. How he had been sent away to camp during the summers. How he had been given anything he wanted, but no one had thought him worth their time or attention. No one had ever cared what he did with himself, the way that George seemed to care last night. In the shower, Michael had understood that his life mattered to George, that what he was doing was causing George pain. Quietly, he told George that he knew he was in trouble, had known it for months, but hadn't thought that anyone would care to help, would spend the time to help. "Would you help me, George?" he asked, and began to cry. This all happened some years ago, and the story has a happy ending. For a year, the two went nightly to a cocaine addiction program. It wasn't easy, but together they were successful. Michael is now a well-established businessman with a loving wife and a small child. George, in reflecting back on this time, feels that it was a major learning experience for him. I was always trying to get it right. Between Buddhism and business school, I was always working on myself, my reactions, and my feelings to meet some standard of excellence. Somehow it had never occurred to me that who I really was could be all right. If God had wanted Michael to live with Buddha, he would have given him Buddha for a roommate. Instead, he gave him a caring, middle-class guy from a traditional Midwestern family whose parents had never even been drunk. When I finally acted from my integrity, I was just what was needed. In the end, all I had to give Michael was my integrity, and it was enough. Today, Dr. Remen helps us explore such an important concept, the concept of getting it right. When do we know that we're acting in the best way? I would imagine for many of us, we question the actions that we take. And we wonder to ourselves, am I doing the right thing? So many of us work on ourselves to make sure that we perhaps are different than how we grew up, that we mature over time, that the way that we might have acted as a younger person, we no longer act in. And we work on ourselves, trying to improve ourselves. I think what this week's story and this reflection leads us to is Dr. Remen pointing us towards the path that sometimes just who we are is good enough. The story about George and Michael, two roommates, two good friends. The story is challenging. It's a hard story to read through. Some of the elements of it might be difficult for us to swallow. The drug addiction might be hard. Some of us might not connect necessarily to George and his Buddhist practice, but I think at the core of it, it's about how does one person act in love towards another one. George sees that his roommate Michael, his best friend, who was there for him when he needed help, is going down a bad path, and he wants to be able to help him, but he doesn't want to do so in a way that's judgmental or in a way that will interfere with Michael. He wants to treat him with love and compassion. But his passivity, or the way that he interprets those, ideas, those feelings to be one of passivity, breaks when finally there's a moment and George kind of lashes out at Michael, and lashes out at him and gives him an ultimatum and says, "This is it." But what George doesn't realize is that in that moment, Michael felt love. Michael finally experienced someone who deeply cared about him, who wanted to help him, who wanted to walk alongside him. And George didn't know this, but Michael hadn't had that in his life. It's another reminder that each of us has a story. Some of us might look at someone else and say, why are they acting that way? What are they doing? Why do they do that? And Dr. Remen, through this story, is reminding us that each of us have our own stories, and it might be something in our background, something in our lives that lead us to this moment, that lead us to the way that we're acting in such a way. And the other lesson is that George learns and that we learn as readers is that sometimes when we just act from who we are, from our instincts, that's going to be good enough. George feels like he's being judgmental, feels like he's interfering with Michael's life. He's kind of a little bit violent towards him, but he actually ends up helping him in that moment. And he realizes that who he really is all right, that he can act from a place of integrity, and that can actually bring healing and connection between the two individuals. So that's my hope for all of us today and in this week going forward, is that we, as we try to figure out how to get things right in the world, we realize that there will be moments that we just should act from our own integrity, just what our instinct would say, and that will be enough, and that will be all right, and that will bring the greatest amount of healing. Have a great day, everyone.